Hey everyone, so I'm just potting my tomatoes up to bigger size pots here. This is something that I made a mental note to do, oh gosh, earlier this week. And should have done it then. I always say that with seedlings, you really have to keep them moving, because if you let them stall, it's real hard to keep them on the right, on the right track. And, you know, I just didn't have time until the weekend. So I should have done this a couple days ago. And they are struggling not struggling a little bit, they still look pretty good. For a couple reasons. One, they're super dry. I could not keep them moist in these size pots anymore. And two, they got so tall they were running into the grow lights. I still have these in my growing in my basement because I still think it's too cold for these to be outside, even in my little greenhouses. Just a couple days ago was our last frost date, like 30% or whatever. Although we've not had frost here in our area, even though areas much to the south of us have had frost for the past couple of weeks. We've not had one for, I bet, 2 or 3 weeks now. But just because it's not frost doesn't mean that it's warm enough for tomatoes, because tomatoes just want it warm. So these are staying inside, although I am going to move a lot of other stuff outside. So I just use pots that I have. I save pots that my plants come in, not all of them because I would have a million, but I save enough for whatever I need to use. And of course, when you pot on your tomatoes, you can plant them nice and deep. I planted that one, I don't know, maybe a couple inches of stem. I could have gone even deeper on those. You know, I figure these will probably go out in 2 weeks. And so I think moving them on to bigger than a 4-inch pot is probably overkill and takes up a lot of soil. So I'm just going to call it good with this 4-inch pot. That'll have enough moisture in there. All right, so those are going to get, I'll finish potting these all up. Those will get a nice drink, which they need badly, and go back inside. And I won't start, maybe in about a week it'll be warm enough at night for these to be in the greenhouse. And that'll be how I'll start hardening them off, with an aim to plant them out in my garden very end of May or early June. Okay, so I thought it might be interesting to just give you a few little catch-ups on a few things going on here. I've had a lot of people wanting to know how the roses did. I wanted to show you how the poppies that I sowed did, and then I'm going to pinch some dahlias. All right, let's go. The greenhouses are getting more and more full. Actually, a lot of what's in this one right here is all annuals that I've purchased. I just got so worried that if I waited any longer, they weren't going to be there, so I picked up some of those. All right. Let's go into this greenhouse, which is mostly dahlias. Now, I started these all at different times. All these that you see here with all the foliage, those are some of the ones that I planted up in that video. A lot of these I started, you know, probably 2 weeks later on some of these. So you can see that they're just starting to put up some green. All right, let me show you how I'm going to pinch some of these that are a little bit more mature. All right, so we've got a couple of dahlias here that are ready to be pinched out. I don't actually pinch. I tend to use my little needle nose pruner. So what you want to do is you always want to go back to a leaf node. Generally speaking, I like to actually go up to the second one here. And I think there are 2 stems here, so we're going to pinch out both. But I think on this one, I'll go to here, and on this one I'll go to here, just because this leaf is pretty low here. So we'll do that. So this is all we do here. Let me get in there for you. You just want to get in there as close as you can. And you can, of course, use your fingers. I just prefer not to. And pinch that out. And then on this one, you can see there are, if you can see this, there are tiny little, see if you can get in there, tiny little leaflets starting there anyway. So I'm just going to go in there and nip that guy off right there. Seems brutal, but what you're going to get is more branching, which equals more flowers. Now, this is an interesting one right here. This year I'm growing dahlias 3 different ways. From tubers that I either purchased or saved, from seed, and I'll grab one of those and show you. Hang on, let me show you what one of those looks like. Okay, here's one from seed that actually needs pinching anyway. So I haven't grown dahlias from seed before, in part because I'm really fussy about the varieties I want. And when you grow from seeds, you never know what you're going to get. So sometimes if you buy seeds, they'll call it a certain type of mix. And they're able to do that because they are growing those plants together in a group. They don't have any other plants in. So they know it's going to be a mix of like short, bright colored ones. So they can call it that. In my garden, if I tried to save seed from my dahlias, I grow so many different kinds of dahlias. I have no idea what it would end up being. These were seeds that I got from Floret, so I'm planting them. I don't know what's going to happen. There might be some real gems in there. They will form tubers, so if you see something you like, you can save the tubers, and then you kind of have your own special dahlia. You can already see the two leaves coming out there. And I'm just going to pinch this one right to here. And then the third way that I'm growing dahlias this year is I bought some rooted cuttings. So these were dahlias that are not yet available in tubers, but I really wanted them. So I bought rooted cuttings of them. And these are the rooted cuttings. These are actually doing bigger, have more growth, look very vigorous. I would say better than the plants that I'm growing from tubers, which is really interesting. So this one, we only have one stem coming up, but I do have to figure out, there's actually a lot of side branching down here already. And there is some side branching there. I think I'm just gonna nip to this one. But here's the thing. I am interested in possibly having more of this one since it's so in demand. However, I think this cutting is going to be too thick to be able to root. We're going to see so generally speaking, you want cuttings to be a little bit smaller. You don't want super thick stems. And if the stem is already hollow, my understanding is that it really doesn't work to do a rooted cutting of it. So we're going to try right here. This is where we're pinching it off anyways. Cuttings work best when you do cuttings that go all the way back to the tuber. So let's see what we got here. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so this stem, let's see if we can get it to focus here. This stem is already hollow, so that will not work. But let's see if we can go up a little bit and see if that stem will work. That's also hollow. So maybe I'll try rooting this just to see. I don't think it'll work. But that's the thing. So you can root your cuttings when you pinch, but if the stems are too big or already hollow, it's probably too late and they're probably not gonna work that well. I'm not saying that's always the case, but that's my understanding. The one thing to know with these rooted cuttings that I bought is that there was a big note with them that said make sure you fertilize these frequently because they don't have any of the energy that you have in a tuber when you're growing from a tuber, which makes a lot of sense. So I have been fertilizing these with fish fertilizer. Okay, so that's all you have to do to, here, let's take another one. Here, this is a good one. What is this? This is probably Crichton honey. This is Linda's baby. So you can see in here, by the way, can you see how many stems are in this pot? I usually, if you've got a clump of tubers that's shooting up a whole bunch of stems, I limit it to 5. So there actually are 5 in here. I will pinch out a stem. In fact, just to show you what that would be. So I'm going to just take this skinny one that's kind of in the middle here, and you just cut it all the way down to the base. And that is, by the way, that stem I think you could root if you wanted to. So that's how you would reduce the number of stems. I limit it to 5. Honestly, I don't know how I landed at 5, if that's something that I read somewhere or just my personal rule of thumb. It does seem to work for me. And then you want to go through and you want to pinch out every one of the stems that's in there. This one I am going to go down here. I know this seems aggressive, but it will make for more flowers later on. And you should do this regardless of whether you started them in pots or you're growing them in the ground. Unless you're growing them for show or some other reason that you need really long stems, pinch them back, you'll have bushier plants that have more flowers on them. But whether you grow them in the ground or start them in pots. Okay, next up, let me show you the roses next. So a lot of people asked for an update on how my roses fared over winter. Now, first of all, you should know we did not have a particularly tough winter, so it wasn't a great test. But this is the climbing rose, which, if you recall, I just laid down and buried in the ground down here. It's all stood up, and I've tied it all in. We do have a clematis growing through there as well. But you can see it's actually leafed out really nicely. It looks pretty good. The sawfly larvae have not attacked it yet. See how long we can hold them off. Seems to be inevitable, but it looks pretty good, and everything came out well in winter on that one. Very few dead canes had to be cut out. You might remember I did my rose collars on these roses that are in the circle garden, and for the most part, they all fared really well. This guy is quite petite. And this guy, there's some dead wood still left in here that I need to cut out. I generally don't cut out anything that I've got questions about that might still be alive until I'm sure it's really dead. This guy has a little errant branch sticking out, but those all look pretty good too coming out of winter. You know, I'm just never gonna have super tall rose shrubs here, I don't think. But these all did pretty well. So you guys remember those poppies that we just threw on the ground? Well, this is them. All these. All the way over here. Poppies everywhere. And because they're so small, this is what poppies do. Okay, so people ask me, like, how do you identify a seedling in your garden to know whether it's a reseeded annual or it's a weed? And I'll say the main thing to do is, well, first of all, just know that it's experience. It's years and years and years of watching them and finally knowing. I can't tell you how many times I've removed seedlings that have turned out to be things I wanted there and left things that turned out to be weeds. So one of it is just experience, but it helps to know what you planted where or what was planted near it to know whether that might be it. And then I let them just grow on a bit. So let me show you like the immature ones going into the mature ones. So if you look right here, this little guy right here, I mean, that could be anything. There's hardly any way to tell that, but it quickly turns into this right here. And this is where you're starting to see that blue color come out. And the first set of true leaves you see has that slightly serrated edge. And then they keep growing on and they become, let's find some more here. And then as they get larger, they end up looking like this. And this is, you know, clearly identifiable poppy. There is some chickweed mixed in here. So like some of this is chickweed. So you have to be a little careful, which is why I just let things grow out a little bit. But we can't, first of all, we don't want that chickweed to run wild in here. And we can't just let all of these poppies develop because none of them will actually perform when they're competing for all these resources. So let me show you how I thin these out and just kind of walk you through that. Okay, so down here is this nice big clump of poppies. You can tell them because they all have these little serrated edges. There's also a violet here. So if I leave all these, nothing will perform. So what we need to do is either cut some of these out or move some. So if you wanted to move some of these somewhere else in your garden, it's really quite easy. You just take a trowel or a knife, whatever, and you just kind of pull up a clump of them. And then once you have this clump, you can thin some of these out perhaps, like you might like do something like that. You're not trying to thin down to one. I think that's unrealistic. Get out any weeds that are in there. And then, maybe you'd move that clump and put that somewhere else in the garden. If you feel like you've got plenty of poppies around your garden, you can either just root them out like that, or you can take a little pruner and just start cutting them off. I, of course, try to leave the healthier ones around. Some of these are I mean, some of these we don't need. You can just let them lay. You don't have to clean them up. Once you pull them out of there, they're not gonna come back to get you. And then here, this clump is still too big. So we really want to take this down to something a bit more manageable. Pull those out. Maybe get these guys out of there. And like here, you can also just use your fingers and work some out. And then maybe you go individually and just take out a few. But I mean, I'd say this is a reasonable size clump to leave. If you do that, they'll bloom well and they'll be fine. So you don't have to thin it down to one every so often, but it is helpful to thin them down a bit, and not just so that you can tell where the chickweed is. Okay, so those are just a couple of little things in the garden today. Other things I have to do in addition to just finishing up those jobs I just showed you is I am going to go through and fertilize all my seedlings that are out in my greenhouse. I've been pretty good at keeping up with it on the stuff I have inside, but I have not done anything outside. So everything in those greenhouses is going to get just a little dose of fish fertilizer today. And then I'm also going to start bringing out more of what I have growing inside. So I think it's safe now to bring my zinnias into the greenhouse, and peppers and tomatoes I'm still going to leave inside. But most other things, I think, oh, and I'm going to leave my really tropical vines inside. Those things really do not like getting cold. They do not appreciate any amount of chilliness at all. So I don't bring those out until, I mean, the nights are like 60. So those are going to stay in the basement for a while. But all those other flower seeds and stuff, I think they'll all be happier in more light outside. And then that starts off the hardening off process. All right, I hope you're having a great day in your garden. I hope you found something in here that was helpful or interesting, and we'll see you soon.